George Cooper didn't die tragically. He died perfectly. And that's what makes it so disturbing. Not perfect in a clean, satisfying way. Perfect in the way that feels deliberately cruel. Because when you map out the last day of George Cooper's life, what he was told, what he said, what the family was supposed to be doing that afternoon, it stops feeling like a TV death and starts feeling like something that was always going to end exactly this way, for exactly this man. Let me walk you through it. The morning George dies, the family is in the middle of planning a bluebonnet photo. Mary booked the photographer. She bought the outfits. She is pulling the whole thing together with the kind of unstoppable maternal energy that means there is absolutely no getting out of it. George, predictably, does not want to do the bluebonnet photo. He'd rather do almost anything else. But he agrees, because that's what George does. He absorbs the things he doesn't want and makes them happen anyway, because it matters to someone he loves. Before he leaves for work, he says goodbye to the family. Not a real goodbye. Not the kind where you stop and look at someone and make sure they know. He says, "See y'all later, 4 o'clock." Meaning the photo, meaning he'll be back, meaning this is just a normal Tuesday and there is nothing to mark about this particular departure. And then he leaves. That's it. That is the last thing George Cooper ever says to his family. No one hugs him. Sheldon, in his own words, says nothing. He barely noticed his father leave. Missy doesn't chase him down the driveway. Mary doesn't stop him at the door. He just walks out, and everyone goes back to whatever they were doing, because why wouldn't they? He's coming back at 4. He said so. He never comes back at 4. He dies at work, alone. In a building full of kids he spent his career trying to reach, and not one person he loved is anywhere near him. His co-workers come to the door and tell Mary. That's how she finds out. Not a phone call, not a hospital. 2 men standing on her porch, looking at the floor. And the first thing she says is, "He's okay, right?" She already knows. But she asks anyway, because as long as nobody says the word, there's still a version of the universe where he's coming home. He's not coming home. Here's what makes this land so much harder when you actually sit with it. George had just been offered a coaching job at Rice University. College ball. The thing he'd been quietly wanting his whole career. Not loudly, not with any kind of demand, just steadily. The way George wanted everything. He told Mary. Mary, in one of her genuinely good moments, looked at him and said, "You should take it. You deserve this." They talked about moving to Houston. They had a whole conversation about the future that was finally starting to look like something. George was over the moon. Not explosively. Not George style over the moon with some grand declaration. Just quietly lit up. The kind of happy that only comes when you've been waiting a really long time. He got barely any time with that feeling, a few days at most. He woke up, he knew the job was coming, he said, "See y'all later," and he died before he could live any of it. The show has done a lot of things to this character, but that is the cruelest one. He lived his entire life deferring. The Galveston job? Gone because he did the right thing. The Tulsa offer? Gone because Mary didn't want to move. 20 years of putting the family ahead of every version of himself that wanted something else. And the one time, the one single time, the door actually opened all the way, he didn't make it through. That's not tragedy. That's something more specific than tragedy. That's what it looks like when a person runs out of time right at the moment they were finally going to get something back. And then there's the funeral. Georgie gets up and gives a eulogy that sounds like someone trying very hard not to completely fall apart. He talks about the moments he was sure his father was going to kill him. When he quit high school, when he got Mandy pregnant. And then he says no matter what I did, he always had my back. And he means it in a way that isn't sentimental or performed. He means it factually, the way you describe the weather. George was someone you could always count on. Full stop. Mima talks about never being a fan of George and Mary together, and trying to set Mary up with other men. It gets a laugh because she's Mima, and that's what Mima does. She turns real pain into something you can survive. But underneath the joke is a woman admitting that she underestimated this man for years, and now she doesn't get to tell him she was wrong. And then Sheldon. Sheldon gives no eulogy at the funeral. He can't. He stands at the casket and says the one thing he's capable of saying, which is, "You really didn't want to take that family portrait, did you?" A joke, because grief in a language Sheldon doesn't speak just comes out sideways. But it's also, if you listen to it right, the most honest thing anyone says all day. Because the portrait was the point. The whole day was supposed to be the portrait. George was going to stand in a field of bluebonnets in an outfit he didn't choose and smile for a photographer he didn't book. And he was going to do it because his family wanted it. And instead of that afternoon, his family got this. The adult Sheldon, who narrates the show, eventually gets there. Years later, after he's a father himself, he says he spent a long time focused on his father's shortcomings. But now that he's the same age and has kids of his own, he understands. George was just a person doing the best he could. And he did a lot. He didn't say that at the funeral. He says it into a camera decades later, when George has been gone long enough that Sheldon finally has the vocabulary for what he lost. That is the most painful kind of reckoning. Not the kind that heals something, the kind that arrives too late to do anything with. After the funeral, the family sits at the table and there's still a placemat at George's seat. Mary won't move it. She says he's here in spirit. Sheldon says no, he's not, with that precise, devastating Sheldon literalism that is somehow both completely wrong and completely right at the same time. And nobody knows what to do with the chair or the placemat or the silence that George used to fill by just existing in the room, by being the guy who absorbed everything. The chair eventually gets sat in. The placemat eventually gets cleared. Life goes on in the grinding, relentless way that it always does, even when it shouldn't. Mary retreats into prayer. Georgie becomes the man of the house before he's had any time to be anything else. And Sheldon goes back to California. The family portrait never got taken. That's the detail that keeps coming back. That one afternoon that was supposed to happen and didn't. A photographer waiting somewhere. Outfits laid out on a bed. A field of blue flowers. Ready? And a family that never made it there because a man said, "See you at 4," and the universe decided that was the last line he got. George Cooper spent 7 seasons being the gravitational center of a family that never fully realized it. He held the weight of every person in that house. He coached and drove and worked and stayed and deferred and absorbed. He turned down dreams for people who sometimes didn't even notice the sacrifice. And when he finally had something of his own coming, a job, a future, a version of the story that was also his, he ran out of time before he could live it. The disturbing part isn't how he died. It's how quietly he was already disappearing before he got there. It's that his last words were a reminder about a 4 o'clock appointment. It's that the people who loved him most assumed there would be more time. There's always more time until there isn't.